We could say that this second movement is sort of a sonata form because it has two themes, a first climax, then a development, another climax, and then a sort of recapitulation. And by the way, the introduction is repeated at the beginning of the third movement, so that completes the cycle in a way. And this development starts with this very eerie empty fifth that was E minor at the end of the climax. And from here I feel like the element from being only wind changes and expands into being a sort of stormy sea, a stormy ocean, because of the speed, because of the twirls given by the chromaticisms both in the right and in the left, the quick change of harmonies, contrasts in dynamics. And of course, to create the feeling of the wind, we need to create very long lines, stretched out discourses. And the way to do that is to find a set of fingers that allows us not to interrupt so many times the phrase. This development is constructed basically just on the same intervals that were there in the very beginning of the sonata and in general in the first movement. And in particular, the two minor seconds, so three notes that have a semitone of distance between each other, need to create this very creepy and sliding sound that I feel has to be played with consecutive fingers. By that I mean either it's 2, 3, 4, it's 1, 2, 3, but the effect of sliding, the notes being slightly glued, communicates us that even though the wind, the movement is going somewhere, and that is given by the chromaticism, it's still very thick. As we said at the end of the climax, it's still a very dark matter that is moving, so that's why the cooperation of strong wind and strong water creates this sort of storm. The ear doesn't perceive any connection particularly between the harmonies because of the melodic complexity that there is and the different textures utilized with basically every single register of the piano. But the truth is that there is quite a lot of connection and quite a lot of order within the harmony changes that happen in this first part. There are basically 6 chords. We have 3 sections of 2 chords connected with each other. And the first 2 are based on an interval of triton. So the interval of the devil that actually in this case proves that the triton itself, especially as a distance between keys, doesn't necessarily create a distance that is dissonant or that is unexpected. Actually, the keys, especially if we use the dominant form of the first one, are a lot closer. So for example, the first change is from E major dominant with the minor ninth to B flat minor. And especially the minor ninth keeps the same color, even if of course there is a bit of a question inside because of the dominant. But then, especially because of the F, it is easier to transition to B flat minor. It's sort of a change of color more than a change of attitude. So the first change really gets to a dark place. The second one starts from another dominant ninth, minor ninth, basically constructed in the same exact way, and by the way, a semitone below. So one expects it could get even darker, but actually the change that goes to A minor, I feel like it's more dramatic just because of inherently how A minor sounds. B flat minor, having all these flats, sounds very dark, while A minor sounds more diatonic, more serious in a way. And in both of these cases, these changes of chords are followed by a different iteration of the wind that intertwines with the sea. This part is in general very full of contrapunctual games and, as I was saying before, chasings that fight with each other just like the elements. In the wind that is basically this B flat minor chord, I prefer to use a fingering that helps the hand to have a sort of a physical twirl and leftwards direction. Especially this change after the first position to 5, so this new position, if the hand is already rotating and going towards the left, it's not as hard as it looks. And as I was saying, it keeps not only having 2 positions very clear, also for the head is really good, but the direction and the rush that it creates towards the left is very significant. And after this descent, not only we are already using the same intervals of the first movement, the same harmony because we are in B flat minor, but you're using the, so to speak, counter subject that we had, so the alternating hands with the alternating rhythm that create a sort of alternate contrapunctal line that goes down. And just like in the first movement, Rachmaninov proves us that just by adding a bit of notes in the lower register, especially in a key that is so full of flats already, we really create a paste that is very thick and results almost foggy to the ears, because the melodic discourse remains always very, very clear, and especially because of the contrapunctal alternation between the right hand and the left hand, we can always tell where the music is headed, but color-wise it's always towards the darker side, so a bit brown towards the black. And to maintain this darkness, even though he lands on what would be called traditionally a G flat major 7th and also 4th species 7th, it's a very positive chord in itself, but the first inversion makes it completely different, and also the register. So to come back to the chords, we had these first 2 that had a triton of distance. So we have the first one that goes from E to B flat. The second one goes from E flat to A, keeping, by the way, same melody and going 1 semitone below. And the third one is actually the shortest distance between these 2 chords. And this, and the fact that the resolution is not minor anymore but is major, and also in second inversion, makes us understand, oh, finally we arrive somewhere, which is actually just an illusion because we're only starting now the real crescendo. So this third change that I'm talking about is, once again, we expect the same exact iteration of the interval because we went a semitone down to D major minor 9th, but after it we just go a minor 3rd below, but second inversion. So this is a perfect preparation, the second inversion in general, and of course this very strange key utilized in this context prepares us for something that is definitely more hopeful than these 2 minor chords, but still has a lot to say. So after having had these 6 changes that are very clear in terms of harmony and very ordered, now we start developing more the chromatic elements that were in the theme. So using these elements, the harmony changes are a lot less relevant in a sense, because it's more of the melodic and the overall dynamic sense of direction that matters in this part. And especially the left hand is very hard to maintain the same phrasing because there are a lot of jumps, and I suggest we still really practice in a way that makes it very smooth and has the same exact principle of having the first three notes louder than the other. So there's 6 notes, the first 3 always being kind of chromatic or closer to each other. The 3 other notes that are remaining, even though the discourse is doing a overall crescendo, I feel like needs to contrast. So the left hand goes down to a diminuendo while the right hand is climbing up. And the key to maintaining this is, of course, as we said before, keeping consecutive fingers on the first 3 notes of each pattern and using a very round motion. The right hand particularly contrasts, and the right hand actually imitates almost perfectly the left hand in the sense that it has this very early syncopation that was basically a transformation compared to what it had before. It started right after, but melodically it didn't have importance because it was very short and it was just the beginning of the twirl. But in this case we are sort of adding a stop that makes then the wind that comes after a lot more powerful. So we have the right hand always doing syncopations. And this goes without saying, but just by looking at the score, we can understand that this section needs a lot of rubato. There are a lot of time signatures, changes, these changes of patterns. There are triplets, quadruplets, irregular groups, 2 against 3s. So in general, Rachmaninov is not giving us very clear downbeats apart from the few chords, and in general the rest is, of course, to depict something that is moving, such as the wind or the sea. It cannot be exactly in tempo. So this particular crescendo that we're doing now with the 2 waves basically chasing each other needs a lot of direction towards the octaves, and this is facilitated in a way by this syncopation and these calls between the 2 hands. And I feel like this is a very impressionist or symbolist moment for Rachmaninov, because he is very realistic in the wind and the sea and how they go physically. So of course after a crescendo there is going to be a diminuendo that is not as regular as one might think. So instead of being exactly the same amount of bars and the same pattern, the same harmonic changes, is 2 or 3 bars that go to a very quick descent into nothing and into the darkest place we've ever been, which is the distant bells that we're going to get into. And he goes there with sort of twirls that are dying down. The harmonies get more and clear as we go on. Even the changes are less expected, except for the last change though, because it goes from G flat major to C major, which is once again a triton. So in a way he is giving us a very clear structure, and I feel like intuitively, even if one doesn't know necessarily that there's a triton, it's not really necessary, because the change between these harmonies is so clearly part of a pattern because of the change of color, as I was saying before. And it's always a very clever mixture of surprise, because Even though we're going from a major key to another major key, the surprise is of course still there. G flat major has of course a very particular color, and the C major is one of the brightest keys, but in this particular moment, C major is the darkest ever. It couldn't be more dark because of the first inversion and because of the register, which once again play a huge factor in how we perceive the different keys. So after the crescendo, to arrive to the C major we're talking about, the twirling descent has to have a very clear movement of the arms and the body that helps this twirling to be communicated in a simple way. Otherwise, all of these harmonic changes result very complex, and in the end they're just to add a bit of tonality to each color. Especially this last change is still above, and finally here we can land.